Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Playing with Fire podcast. I'm Shireen Anderson, one of the executive producers, and we're thrilled to continue our conversation today with Anne Belden and Paul Gullixson, the authors of Inflamed. So sit back and relax and enjoy Volume 2.
I just want to make one note about around the same time as the Tubbs fire in 2017, there was a larger hurricane, Irma, I believe it was, in Florida, where 12 seniors at a senior care facility there died, not because of the hurricane, but because they lost power. And in the aftermath of that, they had no air conditioning and they died of heat
Oh
stroke
my gosh.
because of the high temperatures. And so Florida adopted a requirement that these places have backup generators so that they can take care of their residents after a catastrophic event like this. One of the heroes of our story, Beth Steffi, whose mother was at Villa Capri, she's been advocating for legislative change, and this has been the biggest thing that she's pushed for in the state of California. We don't have this requirement. And this year we came the closest yet of getting a bill through the state legislature that would require these kinds of retirement facilities to have backup power in the case of emergency. And we passed unanimously in the Senate, but it was killed in the Assembly, unfortunately. But I know Beth's determined to keep going on this.
Wow.
So
I'm glad you brought that up because Shireen, one of our producers, had asked me to ask you about the story of Alice.
So Alice was Beth's mother, Alice Heroism, and she was one of the last 7 or 8 residents rescued. She ended up in a police car and was taken to a shelter. Villa Capri residents were scattered among 4 or 5 shelters, and some of them in memory care without the ability to even say where they belonged or know their names. Alice ended up at the fairgrounds shelter at the Veterans Center, and she happened to remember her daughter's number and was able, a volunteer called her daughter, and so she got plucked out of the system. And they didn't have a plan for where to take residents. So they ended up first in a parking lot at a shopping mall, and then someone got their pastor to open up a church. So they ended up at a church temporarily until that church had to be evacuated. And so Alice ended up eventually at the church, and there was no real system checking people. There was kind of a system of checking people in and out, but not really. They didn't know. Villa Capri officials didn't even know where anyone was. But Alice is what helped start this whole story, because when they asked her what happened, she said, Helen Allen's son rescued me. And no one believed her. Beth was wondering why she left without a coat, why she had no coat on or anything. And so they kept asking her, and she kept saying, Helen Allen's son rescued me. And again, they're like, oh, it must have been a police officer or firefighter who looked the same. They didn't believe her. And then they find out that Helen Allen's son, Mark Allen, is the one who woke her up. And his wife, Kathy, helped her descend stairs.
Wow.
And then she was one of the last ones in a police car to get out of there before the building burned down.
And if I may add, part of this botched evacuation of the residents that were evacuated, many of them didn't have their clothes, they didn't have their prescriptions, they didn't have their glasses. Some of them weren't even fully clothed. They were wrapped in bed sheets. They were rushed out of the room so quickly, they didn't have essentials that they needed. And this was really life-threatening for some of these individuals because of the status of how that happened. And I do want to note, not all retirement complexes were this way. Our book includes a chapter of a retirement complex that did it right. And it was just down the hill from Oakmont's Villa Capri, where the executive director went up on the roof, saw the fire approaching, activated their evacuation plan, and they very systemically, they had set up a contract with buses to arrive, get hall leaders, were leading people out of their rooms. They had hall buddies, evacuation partners. They marked the doors that had exited. They had clipboards of people checking to make sure everybody got on that shuttle. I mean, it was rushed, but it was very uniform and organized. And that stood as a contrast as to the chaos and the catastrophic results that happened as a result of the lack of planning and lack of execution. But thankfully, there were some people who did stick around. Otherwise, many people would have died
Right.
there.
One thing I'd like to add to that is because of the chaotic nature of this completely botched evacuation, many seniors had awful effects. They were,
PTSD.
they
Yeah.
had PTSD. They lost their entire community. Family members were searching shelters for them. Family members were not told where their loved ones were. Some of them ended up with wounds. One woman fell out of a wheelchair at the church. She was not capable of sitting up in a wheelchair. She fell out, broke a hip, never recovered. Another one was so traumatized she stopped eating. And there were about 4 who died within about 8 to 10 weeks of the
Wow.
fire. Another woman who sat in the smoky building for 3 hours, she had asthma. She died within 2 weeks of respiratory failure. So we saw that there was a decline in the health and mental well-being of almost all of the seniors immediately after this. Family members testified that their loved ones, their parents were never the same after this. They were traumatized. And it's not that moving seniors in the middle of the night wouldn't be difficult on them. I know that it would, but when they're moved from shelter to shelter in such a chaotic, disorganized way without their shoes or socks or hearing aids or meds or glasses, it's even more terrifying.
And if I could also add that some of the rescuers themselves were up at Verena. Some of the residents themselves helped in the evacuation. Bob Minton ultimately worked with a police officer to help check rooms and clear people out of rooms. He suffered extensive lung damage and had to move back to Canada because of it. Another, Frank Perez, he was a floor captain for his evacuation and was instrumental in stopping the initial attack of the fire up at his place. He was actually at one point stomping on flames that crashed through his patio window and ended up pouring a bucket of water on it. We have that in this story as well. And Frank also, he had extensive lung damage, and we lost him soon after. So this botched evacuation, if you will, really had many negative impacts on people, not the least of which is the PTSD that they suffered as well.
Right. And that botched evacuation is something that really we need to address. We need to spend more time on that kind of a fix. And I could literally talk to both of you. This is probably the easiest interview I've ever done because you guys are just a plethora of info.
We're stop us. We're a couple of chatterboxes.
Oh, I love it. This is fine with me. But we're going to go ahead and we'll move on to what my next thoughts are and moving into the fire investigation side of this thing. And I'm kind of at a point with this because we went out there. It was almost the next year. I'm pretty sure it was spring of 18 when we finally got the call to go out there and look at this because somebody had brought up the question about a CAL FIRE report. Did their report make sense? Did they use facts and was it a solid report? So I read their report and it seemed a little weak to say the least, but I went out there and we walked the side of the hill where the fire started, not at the house, at the side of the hill. We found the video of the event. And do you guys look at the CAL FIRE report, the initial one, and I don't know if a secondary one came out that kind of addressed or readdressed the PG&E involvement. Did you guys ever get any of that? Did you ever look into their findings?
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
we read the report. In fact, we quote the report in the book. That was the official report at the time, although there were still some lingering legal cases where there were follow-up private investigations you may know about, Brian. But certainly there were gaps in their investigation in the time frame of how things happened, where things happened. And it was their best guess at what happened, when and where at the time. But we didn't spend a lot of time re-examining it, mainly because we were more focused on the back end of the fire. After the fire started, it swept quickly from Napa County to Santa Rosa at horrific speed. We do note that there was a similar fire and a similar burn scar in 1964 in a fire called the Hanley Fire, which burned the same spot of land, ended up stopping at Highway 101. And this fire had actually leaped Highway 101. But for reference, that fire took 4 days to burn from Calistoga to Santa Rosa. This one took 4 hours.
Right.
And that just speaks to the horrific nature of the winds that night. And also You know that it wasn't just the winds, it was also the fuel moisture levels. It was a tinderbox at the time. I'll just throw in one tidbit. If fuel moisture levels get below 30%, the vegetation is essentially considered high risk for fire. That night, the fuel moisture level in Santa Rosa was 4.5%. And in Napa, it was 3.7%. So it was a tinderbox waiting to happen that night. There's no question. And we're still on edge about those kinds of conditions.
Oh, yeah, because they're not getting better. And you brought up the
No.
wind. I think that is our significant weather change because we've always had dry fuels. Come the end of the
Yeah.
summer, you bake
Mhm.
every piece of moisture out of all of the grass and the leaves and everything. That just happens. But the wind is something that
Yeah.
is becoming more of an issue. And that is weather related. That is directly because of the high low pressures and the variances in between them, how quickly they develop these wind events. And it's just overwhelming everybody because it's throwing embers. You know, we used to get an ember a quarter mile. Now we're
Yeah.
talking about embers from certain types of fuels that are going 3/4 of a mile to a
Yeah.
mile.
It's crazy.
It's
Yeah.
absolutely nuts. And your defendable space is no longer viable because an ember will start a floor mat on fire, even though you've cleaned all your vegetation away from your house and there's nothing to burn. If you got a floor mat, a swing, anything like that that's near your house, there you go. It takes away
Yeah.
that defendable space thing. So there's a lot of things that we can look at to better prepare ourselves for summer and for wildfire season, which now, let's face it, in California, at least Southern California, it's year round. They don't really have a break down there. They didn't last year. So
Yeah.
when you guys first started doing this, and I don't know where you were in the process, PG&E was off of the hook initially, correct? In your report?
No, I think initially people thought it was PG&E because they knew PG&E was responsible for some of the other fires.
Okay.
Yeah. In fact, they were found responsible of the LNU lightning fires that Ann mentioned, that you mentioned. There was just a whole series of fires throughout the North Coast in 2017. And it was down power lines that were found to be responsible just about in all of them. And this was the only one that it wasn't found responsible for in the ultimate study.
Did you find that the lawsuit part of this fire was frustrating because you weren't able to get information or, you brought up the depositions that became sealed. Was it hard for you guys to get information?
No, I think because it never went to trial, we had all the information. I mean, I had $1,200 worth of copies of court documents that we could pour through. We also had investigative reports from social services, and then the district attorney and state's district attorney actually looked into possible criminal charges that were never filed. So the story kept going even beyond the lawsuit, but we really had almost all the documents from the first court case, and they had expected to go to trial. So there was a lot there.
And all of these provided valuable information that helped us piece together this puzzle of what actually happened. And so our reporting is based largely on these kinds of documents. But for example, the state investigation was very harsh. And ultimately, Oakmont Senior Living, as a result of the state investigation, they were forced to admit, which they earlier had denied, they were forced to admit that the residents were abandoned, which was the first time. And it was not long after that, the local district attorney launched an investigation, as Ann mentioned, into possible criminal charges concerning the abandonment of these residents. And that ended up in a stipulated civil agreement between the district attorney and the owners of Oakmont Senior Living, mainly Bill Gallagher. And he agreed to pay $500,000 in fines and agreed to a certain number of new additions that they would agree to change conditions and improvements. And the ink on that agreement was barely dry. It was 50 days later that Gallagher himself turned around and launched a recall campaign against the district attorney. And it was clearly seen as a retaliation for looking into this for possible criminal charges. And as Ann said, this story continued to unfold. And as we're working on this book, we're telling our editors, oh, well, this happened and this investigation came out. And now there's this recall campaign. And our editor said back on the East Coast, said, yes, keep following it. This story needs to be told. And that's why it turned into a 5-year effort.
And I would like to add that one of the reasons we wrote the book is to prevent this from happening again. We wanted other assisted living or any businesses that care for seniors to look at what they're doing and review their emergency procedures. This assisted living is a burgeoning industry. It's more than $80 billion a year. Most of them are for profit. These are cash cows for the corporate owners. And what we've seen over and over again, we saw it in Maui. In Maui, there's an assisted living home that burned down where 3 people died. In the Palisades fire, there were 3 people left behind at 2 different facilities. One woman was rescued by her son who went looking for her.
Yeah, that was the Eaton fire. Yeah.
Yeah, in the Eaton fire. And we have seen over and over again that these places are not prepared. And just this past summer in Massachusetts, there were 9 assisted living residents died in a fire when the building was on fire. And now I haven't seen the official fire reports, but I do know that even in a catastrophic event, if you don't have any emergency planning, if you haven't trained managers or employees or staff or the night staff, you're not going to have a good outcome. You're not going to have an orderly evacuation. Like just a little tiny thing like this. I actually asked this memory care facility today, I said, when do you train your night staff? Oh, all our safety meetings are at 2 p.m. Night staff are working all night. They should be trained during the night, not having to come in when they should be sleeping. There's so much to the whole training part of this. And the fact that so many of these places are not ready, whether they're boarding care facilities or larger, luxurious assisted living, if they don't have that emergency plan and evacuation plan, even if they do, if they haven't trained their staff and their managers, if they haven't practiced fire drills with residents, they're not going to have good outcomes.
Yeah. And I feel right now that necessary to tell the listeners, if you've got parents that are reaching this age, what you just did, go and you ask these important questions.
Yeah.
And if they can't answer them, either don't go there or get them to fix the problem.
Yeah.
I would just emphasize massively, you guys get out there and talk to these people that are going to be taking care of your parents. Most of our listeners have parents, so I would think that they would want to do that. So I just felt it necessary to say that.
And can I just say one gratifying thing is that we are hearing from people that are asking those questions. And we've even heard from several senior care facilities that are using our book as a way to improve among their resident councils, as a way to improve their evacuation procedures and techniques. And we've spoken at a couple, one in Portola Valley in the South Bay, in the Bay Area here in California. And they were really interested in using our book as a manual of how to improve their evacuation, because they have a very similar situation. There's only one way in and one way out, and it's a very wooded area, and they're very beautiful, but very remote. And we've heard from some others who are using it for that same purpose.
And do you feel like you guys have made a difference, or that things have changed since 2017 on this topic?
I wish I could say yes. I wish I could say that Inflamed was mandatory reading for every single executive director of every assisted living organization. We would like to get to that point. We would like to get to a place where these facilities are not just focused on a culture of profit, but a culture of safety. And that's really what you're trying to get at when you're putting your parents somewhere. Is this a place where they will be safe?
Right.
Do they have a culture of safety? You know, it's great that they have Tai Chi, and it's great that they have yoga and wine caves. But what happens in the middle of the night when there's a fire nearby? Do they have that training?
Yeah, any emergency requires practice. You have to prepare for it in one way or another, be it a firestorm, a tornado, a hurricane, a flood, whatever it is. They have to not only have it in their little binder behind their desk, but they have to tell the people the staff, this is what you need to do. This is how we
Yep.
evacuate. And, maybe something that people look at, being a first responder, both my wife and I, we know that the craziness that happens when you have an incident like this. So maybe the communities develop something like a second responder, people whose primary
Yep.
purpose is to go to these seniors or care facilities, be it for mentally ill or whatever it be, and assist in that, making it so that these
Yeah.
people aren't left behind. There has to be another way, because when I'm on a fire engine, we're getting the people that are in the immediate zone of harm. We're trying to get them out, and you get overwhelmed really quick because there's obviously a lot more population than there is firefighters on duty. So
Yeah.
those first responders, PD, sheriff, ambulance, fire, you just overwhelm them so fast. And then when you can't get around, that's a whole nother story because the roads are blocked up. So maybe doing something, looking at this as a bigger picture change instead of just throwing it all into, well, the fire department needs to fix this or the police department needs to do that. We as a community need to start stepping up and saying, I want to do this. When there's an incident, let's start a CERT program, something like that, where the community gets involved. And maybe that's something we can throw out there and pencil out something that would work. It breaks my heart, literally breaks my heart every time I hear of these people dying during an evacuation. They're trying to evacuate and they're getting burned over in their cars. The bus is getting burned over or whatever, or they're being abandoned in the care facility because the staff either can't get there or doesn't go for other reasons.
And I think one thing you said that's key is not just having a plan, but practicing that plan. Caregivers at Villa Capri had been given a handout on how to do a 2-person carry downstairs. The power was out and the residents on the second floor needed to get to the first. They had never practiced it. They had never seen it. They had been given a handout. That's not training. A lot of these places will check off a box that, oh yeah, 2-person handout. Here's 2-person carry down the stairs.
Right.
Here's a handout. That's not going to work unless you've practiced it.
Right.
And Brian, I couldn't agree more with you on that. These places, as Ann pointed out, are really high end, majestic chandeliers, grand pianos, incredible dining halls, but there's sort of a Titanic element to them. Beautiful accommodations, not enough lifeboats. And I think, yes, they need to be doing more to make sure that they're ready to help their residents with training and plans. But I think it is a communal responsibility that we all need to be ready to recognize that our seniors need to be the first ones out, not the last ones out in a catastrophic event like this. And I like your idea.
Right.
I do want to add that firefighters in the end helped to save a lot of people, especially at Verena, and they did some heroic tasks. And in Sonoma County, different fire districts merged to create a more comprehensive firefighting community. A lot of things did change in our community after, so we are much better prepared as a county to deal with a catastrophic fire.
That's great to hear. Ann, you said your son is a firefighter?
He was.
Don't tell me he went to the police department because I will hang up this call.
No. He was an EMT firefighter, and then he went to finish his bachelor's degree, and he did that in 2020 with the pandemic hitting, and he decided to stay in Colorado, and he had a business degree in econ, but he misses it. I think it was his first love, and he did it for a few years, but he ultimately went in a different direction. And to be honest, he fought in like 3 firestorms in 1 year. And he was someone that they took blood samples for to see what chemicals and hazardous waste materials were like in his bloodstream. And I think that might have
scared him a little bit.
Scared him a little bit because for 20 years old to find out the things that he had inhaled and how they were affecting him, I think was a little daunting.
Being a guinea pig is not fun. And to that, the Palisades fire and the Eaton fire, there are firefighters that are extremely sick from that right now. And we were just on our way back from Nevada a couple of days ago, and My wife was reading an article about some firefighters that got exposed to an electric car that was burning,
Oh,
and one of the cells ruptured and they got exposed to the cloud. And now they're all very sick. I don't want to say your son made a good choice because I came from the fire community. I think it's a very noble profession and it takes a special personality to do that. But maybe that was somebody's way of looking over him saying, let's keep you out of this because something could have happened to you. But the glass is half full in my mind. Paul, you live up in that area. Do you see the rebuild happening and the community coming back together? Because I know Paradise, I've driven through there a few times, and it's not coming back very fast
no,
up there.
no.
So what are
No,
you seeing?
I think you're right. I've been through Paradise too a couple of times, and the progress there is very slow. I can say that here the progress has been really phenomenal. There are some neighborhoods that are completely rebuilt, and they've really rebounded in ways that have strengthened the community. In Coffee Park, in particular, the neighborhood association, they still get together regularly and they
Nice.
support one another. And there's just been a real strong community bond that has grown as a result of this tragedy. And we've seen it in other communities as well. We also lost some commercial businesses. We lost a huge Kmart and a bunch of restaurants. That area is still unbuilt. We have some hotels that are being rebuilt now, but only now. Some of our residential areas were rebuilt faster. But I think the message to communities that have suffered these kinds of massive wildfires is rebuild as quickly as you can, because the longer it takes, the longer it's going to take. And you're going to end up in a hole. And so our community really took that on and have rebuilt really quickly. And as Ann mentioned, we've also improved our alert and warning systems. We've
Oh,
improved our
great.
response times. Now, at this time of year, when we know that there's red flag warnings, there's wind warnings, our firefighters have strike teams out on patrol. They're not waiting in fire stations. They're out ready to strike. We have a lot more fixed wing aircraft ready to respond. It has improved a great deal, but we know what can happen. And we saw what happened again in Palisades fire and Eaton fire with the winds. And we know it's just an ongoing vulnerability. As we said, we feel there's still a lot of lessons to be learned from this cautionary tale of what happened. And there's still things that we can be doing better.
One thing I would like to add is also a lot of groups across Sonoma County, a lot of neighbors realize that you might not be able to rely on police and
Exactly.
fire
Right.
in a
Yeah.
disaster. So they've created Map Your Neighborhood. I know my neighborhood has one of those. Every one of my neighbors, we have these radios. We know where people's propane tanks are, who their pets are, who the elderly are in the neighborhood, and things like that.
Yep.
Of course, it doesn't happen until after an event,
Right.
unfortunately.
Thank you so much for listening to Volume 2. We're excited to bring you another episode about the book Inflamed that will be coming up on our next episode, Volume 3. If you love our podcast, please let us know. Subscribe, rate, support us however you can. And thank you so much. We'll see you on the next episode.